Hello, welcome to it's always summer in Bali. It's always summer if you make it summer. But today we're going to talk about something very one of my favorite things to talk about, which is the cycles of history and how all of these new technologies, blockchain, AI, Web3, all of them fit into the cycles of history. And it's really important to understand this stuff because if you do not understand the cyclicality of history, then you are bound to repeat the mistakes of history. But if you learn the mistakes of history, then you can project forward and know what's coming up ahead, and you can prepare for it properly and prosper throughout the process, right? So what we're going to talk about, just to give you a bit of an overview, we're going to talk about the seasons of history and how to understand the very broad 100-year kind of view of how history plays out. We're going to look at the 250-year revolution cycles, the 250-year decentralization, centralization cycles. We're going to look at the 84-year populism cycle, the 82-year financial cycle, the 28-year financial cycle. We're going to look at bicycles. We're going to look at motorcycles. We are going to look at, I'm just kidding about the last two. I forgot what industrial revolution cycles. We're going to talk about innovation cycles. We're going to talk about so many cycles. Your brain is just going to be going in cycles. Just please don't go cycle. 50-year socioeconomic cycle, 80-year long-term debt cycle. The reason why I want to talk about these cycles is, one, when you understand them, you can really figure out where we are in the process and you can see what's coming forward. But the other big reason is all of these cycles they've started and ended at different times in history. One's going up, one's going down, and there's been this harmonic dissonance between these cycles. This is one of the first times in history, in recorded history, that all of these cycles that we're talking about are resetting between like 2023 and 2030. So within this 7-year period, all of them have a pivot point. And the pivot points are very important because those pivot points are when all of the change happens. The old cycle ends, the old system, the old way of doing things ends, and then the new way of doing things, the new cycle starts for each one of these cycles. But when all of these cycles converge and they harmonically, they come into harmonic resonance, the amount of change that happens at that point is incredible. So it's really important for us to understand that whole process, okay? But before we dive into the cyclicality of this whole thing, we really have to understand some things. Everything in the universe has a seasonality to it, right? Life has a seasonality, nature has a seasonality, everything has a seasonality. So we know, spring is the good times. Spring is the time to plant. Spring is the time to recuperate and enjoy. Summer is the time to reap what you have planted in spring, right? Summer is the best of times, the most prosperous of times. Autumn is the end of that process, and autumn, or fall as some places call it, is the time to prepare for the winter. And then we know, without fail, that the winter is coming. All right? That's a very famous quote from a famous philosopher. He said, winter is coming. Okay? But, and then we know, on the other side of winter is spring. So even in the middle of the coldest, worst times, there is good times on the other side. Okay? So that cyclicality is very important to understand. So we know when to plant. As an investment, when to invest, when to reap. So plant in spring, that's when you get in. You get out in summer and fall, and prepare for winter, which is when things crash and collapse and so on and so forth, right? Now, in the spirit of living seasonally, this isn't just an external thing. This isn't just you invest in a way that is following these seasons. It's more live in a way that is in harmony with nature, right? You fall into harmonic resonance. There are times when we have to become calm and peaceful. And, I remember like living in Calgary, it's minus 30 degrees, Calgary, Canada, right? I lived there for 15 years. And as soon as winter would start to come around, which is like as early as July sometimes, but by August, winter is coming. Winter is at your doorstep. Winter is coming. So what we would do is you become more docile, you become more calm because it's cold, it's terrible. If you just complain a bunch, it doesn't change anything. Then throughout winter, you're in this calm, slow, chilled, cold state, but you still stay calm through it because if you panic and freak out, there's still 8 months of winter left. When spring would come, you would start to come out of winter and start to prepare in a way and start doing activities and getting ready to enjoy. And then when summer would come, it would get way too hot, but you would still be enjoying and maximizing the very long days that you have to, get the maximum out of life that you can, because as soon as fall comes around and the leaves start to change color, that is kind of the signal to go back into that hibernation state, right? So there's this cyclicality to how you live. In that spirit, where we are today is we are in the middle of the pivot points of all of these cycles. And the biggest thing about the pivot points is, let's say it's a 250-year cycle, right? It hasn't pivoted for 250 years. The last time it pivoted was 1776, when the US was formed, right? On up or come down. So anybody who had been even close to the pivot point has died a long time ago. So the pivoting is unbelievable to the people who've actually lived in that long arc of a cycle, right? 82-year cycles, 84-year cycles, all these things. The people who went through the previous pivot of these cycles, the previous resets, the previous great resets, the previous new world orders, are either dead or they are so old that we have put them into old people's homes and we don't listen to them, right? So the people living today, almost the entire population, is not really prepped to be able to understand the gravitas of these things changing, right? And so it seems so different. Our construct of how society works gets challenged, and in that process you get shocked and awed, and your whole world is turned upside down. So you actually end up going into a state of chaos during these pivot points. Those who understand these pivot points and who are prepared for the pivot points and who stay calm and meditative and are ready to ride out the winter that comes during these pivot points are the ones who prosper the most, right? Because they're the ones who realize that in life, adversity and opportunity come at the same time. And adversity and opportunity are two sides of the exact same coin, okay? So you can either take this as the collapse of the system and the blowing up of the world, or the end of the world, like everybody's always said, or you can take this as the beginning of a new world, or you can take this as both. But what are you going to do about it is the bigger question. So now let's go through and look at some of these cycles. The first one we're going to look at is this one. I mean, this is technically 3 cycles, but we are going to look at specifically the revolutionary cycle. The revolutionary cycle is revolutionary. Bam. Isn't that poignant news? Right? The revolutionary cycle is very important because it is a fundamental revolution in the fabric of society as a whole. Like global society gets re-evolutionized during these times. Okay, I'll stop. But the last time, this cycle basically started from effectively like 1776, right? It started in the American Revolution. And we're going to go through the details of why. But the American Revolution was when the world was split into these, 2 separate entities effectively. Democracy as a concept got solidified. Freedom as a way of living came to be, right? Around then is also when the technological revolutions that we looked at started to happen. Around then is also when the centralization, decentralization cycle that we looked at, that we're going to look at, had a pivot point. Basically, that was when the entire system we've lived in for the last, 300 years, 250 years, played out, right? And that was the last time that we had a massive American Revolution, which revolutionized the way that monarchies existed, and it created a system where the whole world then pivoted towards democracy and freedom and went through all of its cycles, right? That cycle is now resetting. If it's a 250-year cycle and it starts in 1776, it is resetting technically in 2026. If you put it on a 250-year timeline. These guys have, the technical American Revolution was 1765 to 1783, and that puts us at about 2008 to 2023, somewhere around there, right? But the point is, and it's not like it's, this exact year it's going to happen. A 250-year cycle takes decades to actually shift properly. But the point is, we are now in the place where the current revolution is playing out in the way that people organize. And the revolutionary cycle is the revolutionary cycle because it happens around a revolution, right? What happened during the American Revolution? The American Revolution was bloodshed and war between monarchies and free people, effectively, or democratic peoples. A lot of people died, but a lot of prosperity and benefits came to the world because of that transition happening. We are now in that same state now. It's very likely that we will have something similar play out during these times. So now, what is the revolution this time? Internet is the base of this revolution. The way people live and organize has gone beyond democracy. We've gone to internetocracy. It's a technocracy, right? We're moving into a technocratic state. The biggest nation in the world today is Facebook. You ever think about that? The biggest, most powerful group of people is Facebook because 3 billion people are together in one space, in the digital space called Facebook. So the biggest, most powerful nation is Facebook. That's why when Facebook tried to make their own stablecoin, they're like, nah, 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 nah. You are India and China put together, my friend. You cannot create a stablecoin, otherwise you shall take over, Mr. Zucks. Mr. Sucks. Crypto is an absolute revolution. And crypto is based on blockchain, right? Blockchain is the revolution that now allows computers to be hooked up in a new way. Instead of giant institutions running the computers in centralized places and making all the money like we've had until now for the internet, this is computers being hooked up by people from across the world coming together and organizing in a new way that is jurisdictionless, right? That's a massive revolution. Now, on top of that, we've built the technology called crypto, and crypto is a revolution in finance, in the way money is represented, in the way digital assets are represented, in the way assets are represented. If you think about it, we have not had a new asset class for a very long period of time. The last time we had a new asset class was technically when, I guess, derivatives were made. Before that was when stocks were made. Before that was like, I don't know, when real estate and gold were made or something. Commodities have been an asset class for a very long period of time. My point is, we have digital assets now. It's a completely new asset class that is a complete revolution that most people can't get their heads around, right? Now, the reason why most people can't get their heads around it is because it is not meant for this world that we're living in. We are trying to conceptualize it from a lens of the old world, which is like this world, the physical, real world, we call it, right? These digital assets and digital representations of things are meant for the next piece of this revolution, which is the metaverse. See, what we're calling the metaverse is not going to be a metaverse. It's going to be an infinite number of metaverses, metaphysical spaces, where humans and entities can be represented in a digital space where we can communicate and meet, fly around like dragons, and have assets and build houses and do all the things that humans want to do, interact and live. But also, the digital is going to come out into the physical world. So we will have devices that will be able to show us in this world representations of digital things that will look real to us the same way. Crypto and blockchain and all these technologies are built for that world, which is a blend of the digital and physical put together, where you have virtual worlds you can go into, but the virtual world also comes out into this physical world. That's why it doesn't make sense in this world, right? Another revolution that gets added into that mix, from my kind of opinion, The most impactful revolution in this whole process is AI, artificial intelligence. We are creating consciousness in a digital form, right? Knowledge, decision making, thinking in a digital form. Now, when you add that into the mix, that means that this digital world is not a dead world. It's a conscious world. It is a world that is gaining knowledge and interacting, and there's entities that like ChatGPT now that we can interact with that will revolutionize the way humanity works. Think about it. Google revolutionized how we work just by bringing information to us. How is it going to revolutionize the world to have an entity that has all of that information inside of its head, inside of its digital little brain that we can talk to, and that doubles in its capacity every 3 months right now? And then one day it will double in its capacity every day, and then every second, and every nanosecond. I know these things are mind-boggling, but it's welcome to the revolution. So we have this new revolution is based on internet. The internet is being revolutionized into blockchain. Blockchain has crypto built on it, so money is being revolutionized. That all gets put into digital and metaphysical spaces called the metaverse, SIS, and also that comes out into the real world alongside with infinitely conscious entities with the world knowledge put inside of them. That is just revolutionary beyond anything anybody could understand. And if you think I understand it, nobody understands it. We are where, back in the day when we used to look at the internet and go, is the internet an A with the circle around it? Is the internet that thing with the A with the circle around it? Remember we used to say that? That's where we are with these technologies, technologically speaking, and also when you look at the arcs. We are revolutionizing how economies are structured. We are creating, like me personally, we are creating digital representations of physical wealth and assets. We're taking real estate and tokenizing it into digital representations. So you can buy a digital version of real estate, and I don't just mean in the metaverse. We mean real physical real estate, break it up into little tokens so somebody can invest and benefit from the ownership of that real estate, be it dividends, be it the appreciation of the assets, be it some kind of governance. But the digital representation can not only allow you to benefit from real estate, it can also then allow you to access that real estate remotely in the digital representation of that real estate. And if all of that doesn't sound like English, welcome to the new revolution. We're tokenizing mines, copper, gold, iron, nickel, rubidium. We're tokenizing the mines in a way so that the wealth can be accessed from anywhere across the world. And it is coded in that the compensation to the people on the ground who actually do the work shall be fair. The rape and pillage of countries cannot happen in these digital ways of investing in these things. And the same way that, somebody could buy one, like with real estate, right? Or mines. Up until now, you couldn't buy $1 of a mine. Right? You just can't. And if you're a farmer in the middle of Indonesia, or you're the miner who's actually mining in Chile or Philippines or any of these countries where this stuff is, you can't buy and invest in mines. How unfair is that? Whereas the tokenized version of that mine, that person could just go in and buy $1 worth, 50 cents worth of these mines, right? So it's revolutionizing the way we invest in and run the operations of mining. We're tokenizing farms. Right? So we're taking farm productivity and tokenizing it without taking the ownership from the farmers themselves, which allows us to get capital flowing in from overseas seamlessly into farmers' hands without the foreigners taking the land from them, and the farmer pays them back from the productivity of the land. All of it's digitally automated so people can't mess with it. That's a completely new way of thinking about investing in farms. That's not even a model that existed. That's why when we presented this model to VCs and other people, the GBBC, Global Blockchain Business Council, their minds were blown, and they said you should go to Davos and present this to the World Economic Forum, right? So we are revolutionizing economies in a fundamental sense. How value is added to people's lives and how wealth is represented and moved is being revolutionized. Now, the other part of this new revolution is this is a non-local, jurisdictionless revolution. That has never happened before, right? American Revolution happened in America. It had effects on Britain, Great Britain, okay Britain. It's not that great, right? It's like meh Britain, you know. The United States and Britain. What was the point I was making? This revolution is non-local and jurisdictionless, right? This revolution is not kept within borders. This is happening on a global scale. Like when you think about it, which country is Bitcoin from? Which country is blockchain from? Which country is the metaverse from? Which country is the internet from? Which country is AI from? Right now we're using the AI from US, but there's AIs being built in every single country, right? So it's a jurisdictionless revolution. So now when you put all of these things together, it builds a world that we can hardly fathom, because our minds and bodies and life experiences are conditioned from the last 250 years of this cycle, of this revolution playing out, right? Okay, now let's go back to that chart and look at the next piece of that cycle, right? So these are called the three harbingers of revolution, because these are the things that come together to really just create the perfect soup for a true revolution to play out. And when you're looking at the populist movement cycle, that's a very important cycle, because history goes through these waves, right? There's times when times are bad, so everybody wants to stand behind a strong man to save the world. And that's when populism shoots up. And then that creates a lot of turmoil in the world. On the other side of the turmoil, everybody goes, wait a minute, that's like not what we want to do. We don't want to just have, dictators running the world. We want freedom and love and peace. And then this cycle goes up, and prosperity and all that good stuff happens. And these cycles, when they're going up, you can think about them as that's prosperity going up. That's quality of life going up. That's improvement in the world going up. So when it comes to populist cycles, the pivot points are chaotic times, when everybody wants to stand, when times are bad and everybody wants to stand behind a leader to take them to the promised land. And you know how they take them to the promised land? War. That happened in American Revolution, war. And then at the end of the American Revolution, they were like, hey, let's not kill each other. Let's go through, 84-ish years of peace. And you know why 84 years? Because by the time we get to the other side, by the time you get to the end of the 84 years, all the people who went through the previous war die. So the new people forget how bad war is. So they're like, no, I believe in this, you believe in that, let's go to war and fight. And then they fight again, and then they go, oops, war is bad. And then another 84 years of non-populism happens. So it started in the American Revolution, went up, then it went to the European civil wars, no bueno there. Then good times came. Then 84 years later, we went to the Great Depression and Hitler. That wasn't a fun time at all for many, many people across the world. After that, we had insane prosperity in the world. And now we've gone back down for another dip to now. And times are not looking too good. And does it mean that there's going to be a war? Yes. Unless history all of a sudden changes its mind and humans all of a sudden change their behavior and everything, yes. Revolutionary cycles pivot around wars. The populist cycles pivot around wars. And we are right now going through that populist cycle. So now, here's the reason why, okay? Are we back to me? Back to my face? Can you see my face? Hi. The thing about populism and nationalism is it goes hand in hand with the rights of individuals going away, right? When populism increases, we're willing to stand behind nations and identities and leaders and give away the rights of humans. That's what happened in Germany, in World War II. All of them came behind Hitler, and the rights of humans got taken away. And I don't have to tell you how, right? Same thing's happening now. We're standing behind these different legions. Oh, I believe in pronouns. You don't believe in pronouns. I believe being poked by something sharp all the time. You don't believe in being poked by something sharp all the time. I'm black, you're white. I'm American, you're Chinese. Everybody starts a fracture. But at the same time, in this process of, giving our freedom away to people stronger than us to make these decisions, people's rights get taken away. Just like you've experienced now, all of a sudden, the right to travel, goodbye. The right to free speech, not anymore. The right to the sanctity of maintaining your own body and what goes into your body, not looking too good, right? And most people just signed up because the time is right for this process to play out. Populism also rises up when things start to not feel okay in the world. That's why we go into states of populism, because the world is not, things start to be wrong in the world. So we're like, we need somebody to come in and fix this thing. And that's usually when society is vulnerable and we end up handing control over to maniacs who take control and build the world that they want. And this happens regularly and constantly. Now, if you think about it, crypto is a type of populism, right? It's basically people saying, we don't trust governments, we don't trust banks, we don't trust institutions, we don't trust countries. We are, breaking away from all that, and we're going to go build a decentralized, free world with a technology called blockchain. That's ironic as hell. If you haven't heard me say that before, just think about that for a second. We're going to stand behind a technology that is going to give us freedom, and it's called blockchain, because that's what gives you freedom on the net and the web, because those give you freedom as well, because we're all thinking and stuff. And we're organizing into this global jurisdictionless group of people that are creating digital representations of power structures like decentralized autonomous organizations called DAOs, so that algorithms can run companies and systems. And we're building artificial intelligences that we're going to rely on to make our decisions. And we think we're going to get freedom? That sounds like a bunch of people going, Hitler will fix it. I don't know. I don't see much of a difference there. So we have to take these things into consideration when creating a lens of what's actually going on. This is my lens, right? In many ways, crypto is the resistance also, right? So it depends on which angle you're looking from. Hello, little ant. Excuse me, sir. Would you please, you mind just going this way? Thank you. Oh, just, yeah, right there. Yeah, good. Oh, thank you. Appreciate you. You good? You doing all right? He looks like he's doing all right. He's cool. He's cool, and he's Bobby. He's our local ant. What were we talking about? Crypto is the resistance. Viva la resistance. That's what we're talking about. So if you're looking at it from one angle, crypto is the prison that we're building for ourselves. From the other side, crypto is the way to be able to escape from the grips of institutions and governments, right? Right now, we just talked about this in the market analysis, but there's the Operation Choke Point 2 playing out, where governments are blocking individuals from being able to access the crypto markets and the digital asset markets. They're shutting down banks. They're basically blocking banks from being able to interact with crypto. They're blocking institutions from being able to bring people into crypto or give them staking services, or blocking Binance. They're doing everything in their power to stop this transition of wealth from countries, from the US dollar to crypto itself. So in that way, crypto is the revolution, right? So again, we have to keep things in balance. I do believe crypto is the way for us to get out of this burning ship called the US dollar. I do believe that we do need to organize ourselves in these international, supranational, jurisdictionless organizations where we can stand behind missions that we want to support. I do believe that. I'm building that myself, for the farmers, for the miners, for anybody who listens. But at the same time, I also do believe that I'm not just going to depend on this thing and I'm building a farm because this thing's called blockchain, and that's a joke. Okay? Sorry. Got a little serious there. All right, let's go back to the chart. So now think about that. The 84-year populism cycle is resetting now. You know, I start this from 1776. So I think we go into war by 2026. That lines up, right? But between now and 2026, we're going into war, according to my opinion and assumptions from the cyclicality of these things, right? And it makes perfect sense because that's about how far the financial system can be stretched. But looking at this three harbingers of revolution chart now, the next cycle is the financial crisis cycle. The financial crisis cycle is very important because that is the nail in the coffin that really pushes people towards populism, that really causes revolutions, that really hurts people in the place where they are willing to get up and riot and go into the streets and go to war, right? Everything's fine and dandy until the food stops hitting tables. And financial crises are when food stops hitting tables. The last one, remember, it was like, it's cyclical. So it's like 1933, then 1961, then 1989, then 2008, next one's 2045. But the thing is, between 2008 and 2045, there is a rise, right? And that is what I think is what's going to take the crypto world into its adoption. Between now and 2045, we're going to see all of the wealth in the world transition to 85% plus of the world's wealth transition to digital representations, digital assets. And by 2045, we'll have another collapse where the US dollar dies and, you know, the old world order completely shifts over and the world reserve currency completely shifts. Now, but think about that. 2045, we think the dollar's going to die tomorrow. No, that's not how these things go. The dollar is going to take a long time to murder everything else, potentially out until 2045, right? Now, that 28-year cycle, it's very interesting when you think about 2008 was when that the previous financial crisis effectively happened, and 2009 is when crypto was created, right? And it's interesting that from 2009 until like 2030-ish is the rise in the next financial cycle. So that's also where we have to keep things in perspective. We think that we're just going to fall off of a cliff and then everything's going to be dead forever. No, in this transitionary period, some of the asset classes prosper. Commodities, real estate, real world wealth, and digital assets are all going to prosper during this time, right? That's super important. Wait, now do we have any questions? I haven't even looked at the chat here. Live chat, live chat. Ah, the mic is scratching. Mike is a DJ? Wait, can we do something about the mic? Are we fixing it? Yeah, it's a new mic, so we're newbies with this thing. It might just be because we have an amp hooked up to the mic and it's really amped up, so it's amping up the bottom stuff there. Is it any better? You know? Is it in a better? You get it? Is it in a bed? Do I just continue? Nah, let's just continue. No, we're adjusting things. One sec, we're adjusting things. Hello, mic check. 1 2 1 2. Check 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 check. Okay, so we shall continue. Now, this financial crisis is going to be very special, right? Because not only is it the financial crisis, it's the financial crisis and the populism crisis, populism cycle and the decentralization cycle and this cycle and that cycle. All of them are shifting at the same time, right? So it's the financial crisis is going to have knock-on effects in this whole process, which is going to revolutionize the way the entire world works and potentially for the next 250 years will work, right? So that's really important for us to keep in mind, because all of these things have synergistic effects effectively. Now, the other thing that happens in this 250-year cycle is we go through the 250-year centralization decentralization cycle. That's very important as well, because until the American Revolution, let's look at this past 250 years, right? Before the American Revolution, the structure of society was very decentralized in that people mostly lived in villages, in small pockets, all spread across the land because we had to farm as much land as possible. Travel was very difficult. Messages and knowledge traveled very slow throughout the whole process. Printing was very slow. Even monarchies and those control structures existed in a way where they had sparse lands to be able to manage at the same time, and the people were decentralized and spread out everywhere. A lot of the decision making was actually done on the ground. The village would decide what's good for the village, the region would decide what's good for the region, then the country would decide. But even the empires and stuff, they were run in this decentralized, broken up way before the American Revolution. When the American Revolution happened, we started to coalesce into cities, right? We started to have industrial revolutions that allowed people to be able to move much further. So you could actually live in a city and travel much further. So people start to coalesce into cities. Then those cities got put inside of borders called countries. The countries became much stronger. We started to coalesce around companies and stocks. The idea of stocks came together, so people got centralized around power structures called companies, right? All of that has made it so that from then until now, we've seen governments get stronger, we've seen cities get bigger, we've seen countries and nationalistic fervor get stronger and stronger, and people start to represent themselves as, from this country, from this region, from this, we start to centralize in this way, from this company, right? Those became our identities in many different ways. Now, as of 2009 until now, and now especially, we're starting to see the speeding up of that cycle going backwards, where people are leaving cities and going back to more remote places because you can work remotely and you can operate remotely. I'm sitting in Bali, right? I moved from the US to Bali, or from Canada to Bali. People are moving all over the place and decentralizing out to many different places. We're also seeing that there's this technology that is decentralized. It's not a coincidence that now we have the new revolution is based on a technology that's itself decentralized, that does not depend on centralized entities whenever necessary to operate. Crypto and blockchain are fully decentralized. People are starting to organize in these decentralized manners. Like even the online communities are all decentralized communities that people can actually operate from anywhere in the world, and because of that, they can live anywhere in the world in many ways, right? It changes the way that we organize, but it's not really the mode to freedom, right? So freedom is a very elusive concept. As far as I'm concerned, freedom's here and freedom's here, right? And freedom's here. And freedom's somewhere lower. Freedom is an internal state. So whatever freedom means to you, you could define us becoming decentralized like this as freedom. But when we talk about autonomy and independence or being able to make your own decisions, all of those things are not fully supported by this decentralized revolution that we're going through, right? When this shift happens, the old centralized structures, they don't just go, oh yeah, sounds good. You want to decentralize? Go ahead. We'll shut down the country. We'll shut down all of the power structures. Go, no problem. They hang around for a long period of time, 50, 60, 70 years. Like even, the US fought against Britain. Britain was like a centralizing, like a monarchy, and they're fighting against as a democracy. Both of them centralized, but the monarchy states took hundreds of years to die, and democracy took hundreds of years to take over. Organization, the stocks and companies took hundred something years to fully be implemented across the world. In the same way, now, yes, we are decentralizing. Yes, we're moving to these new technologies, but our generations will experience it fully fleshed in its full form 50, 60, 70 years down the road. That's when the world will transition to a fully decentralized type of situation, which will probably be run by AIs and things that we can't even imagine today, right? But today, governments and other entities that are centralized entities, companies, they're not going to give up their power that easy. That's why we're seeing this fight between the governments and these decentralized, supranational, jurisdictionless technologies, right? Food production is becoming decentralized. It's going to need to become decentralized. We've had a world that's depended on food to be produced in all parts of the world. It's been cheaper to get your avocados shipped from Ecuador than it has been to produce them locally. Well, now that's not happening anymore. Supply chains are breaking down. The world is fracturing into different states. So in that world, you can't have this like global food production as much. So food production itself is going to become more and more decentralized, where we'll produce locally, eat locally, share locally, and organize into communities. Now those communities themselves are becoming decentralized, right? When you start production locally and you start to really create local networks of support, then communities can start to exist in many different places, right? We're building ones in the mountains of Bali. There's people building them in Ecuador and Costa Rica and Mexico and US and all over the world. People are creating these new communities which are away from cities, which are trying to be self-sufficient, which have their own structures, basically. So communities themselves are becoming decentralized. Power is becoming decentralized. Power, and I mean like powering the world, is becoming decentralized. We are starting to have renewable power generation locally in specific places. And as time moves, power generation will become like little nodes, all of us producing our own power and sharing it, rather than having all the power production happening in a centralized manner. Which means that right now the centralized control of oil, which is running the entire world, will also break down in many different ways, right? Intelligence is becoming decentralized. That's a very interesting one, right? So like knowledge and intelligence in many ways until now was controlled by companies, right? So companies were able to control our access to knowledge, our access to all these things. When you have AIs and modalities of gaining access to knowledge which aren't as controlled, especially with the open source AIs that are coming out, that completely changes the way that people are able to operate, right? Money is becoming decentralized. That's probably the biggest one. That instead of banks and governments and institutions being the only ones who can create money, now people are creating modes of generating value called digital assets, which are completely decentralized. That's a huge shift, because that means that value can flow at velocities and speeds and in ways that aren't so structured in their way. Now, obviously, there's control points and choke points being put in that are going to block people from being able to do things in certain capacities, yes, but there is a whole new structure of money that's being created that's completely decentralized. So that, the people are becoming decentralized, communities are being decentralized, food, power generation, intelligence, money, governance is being decentralized through DAOs and other things. Basically, everything that's required to run society is becoming decentralized in a massive way. That's huge, right? So now, let's just let's just recap all that. We have a centralized world that's been more and more centralizing more and more. That's now becoming decentralized, and the pivot points are now. From 2009 it started, and we're already in the swing of things. We have, the 250-year revolution cycle, which is now resetting around 2026, which is going to revolutionize everything. Okay, that's a huge step. We have populist cycle that is peaking right now, so that's why your Trumps and your Andrew Tates are emerging in the world, because people are standing behind them, which leads to war and stuff like that. We have financial crisis, which is resetting, which is already reset, and we're going through the throes of that. And that's just the beginning. Okay, now let's look at the next cycle, which is the industrial revolution cycles. These ones now we're getting moving more and more towards crypto, right? So when you're looking at the revolution cycle, crypto and blockchain and AI and Web3 are the revolution. When you're looking at the populism, crypto and AI and Web3, metaverse and all this stuff is the revolution. When you're looking at the financial crisis, they're at the core of the financial crisis. When you're looking at centralization, decentralization, they are the base layer technologies that this decentralization is being built on, right? So they are at the core of all of these cycles. But these industrial revolution cycles are the best representation of what these technologies exactly are, right? So every time we have an industrial revolution, the first one we had back in 1784, and that's when we started to have mechanical production, railroads, and steam power. That revolutionized the way people could move, could communicate, could produce, could live, right? That existed from 1784 to 1870. That's about 85 years, right? 85-ish years. That then led to the next industrial revolution, which is mass production, electrical power, and the advent of assembly lines, which increased efficiency, increased people's access to power, and increased people's access to wealth. Then, from 1870 to 1969, so about another 90 years, we had the automated production and electronics and computers revolution. Then in an even shorter period of time, so from 1970 until now, which is 50 years, we have this next, artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, internet revolution. So the timelines are being compressed, because once you have steam power, it's actually pretty quick for you to be able to move stuff and use that steam power and things to get to the next revolution. Once you have electrical and mass production and phones and things, then you can get to the next one even quicker and start to build computers. Once you have computers, then getting to the internet is even quicker. Once you have internet, then getting to artificial intelligence is even quicker, and so on and so forth, right? So actually this next chart is a better representation of that. So the first wave, which was water power, textiles, and iron, took 60 years. The second wave, which is steam power, rail, and steel, took 55 years. Third wave, which is electricity, chemicals, and internal combustion engines, took 50 years. Then 40 years. That was aviation, electronics, and all this stuff. Then 30 years for us to have digital networks and software and new media. Now it's going to be, I think 20 years for us to have AI, robotics, clean technology, all these things that we're going to, blockchain, all the stuff that we're going through right now. So now, these industrial revolutions are very, very important, because what makes the biggest difference in the way that people live is how people move, communicate, and power themselves. That's very important. So this is a really good point made by Jeremy Rifkin in his third Industrial Revolution talk. And Jeremy Rifkin is an economist that has actually led a lot of the development that's happening in the world. His philosophies are the basis of a lot of the development that's happening in the world. But he makes a really good point that each time you change the way people move, change the way that people communicate, and change the way that people power themselves, it revolutionizes the world, right? So the first industrial revolution, we started to be able to move using steam power. We started to be able to communicate using steam printed presses. So mass communication came to being. We started to power things with steam, and that was a massive revolution. Now people could travel way further, they could communicate way further, they could produce so much more, right? So it changed the way the world worked. The second industrial revolution, we could move using cars. We could communicate with telegraphs and power ourselves with electricity. That was a mind-blowing revolution. It increased the ability for communication to happen globally in seconds. People could go so much further. Oil as a power source came of being, and electricity came to be. And the third industrial revolution that we just looked at, you could move with planes. You could literally fly across the world. You could communicate with phones, and you're powering things with oil like across the board. That has built this entire world today that we're calling normal. You know, the future is we move in automated cars and drones and teleport to places in the metaverse. We don't even move. We just pop into existence. You know, I'll just if I want to meet you, I'll just pop right next to you. It won't be a phone call. I'll just go, hey, you accept, and I'll just hologram next to you, and I'll be there, right? So we move in a way that is unfathomable to most people. We'll be able to communicate with our minds. We won't even have to call each other. We can communicate by literally popping into existence next to each other, or we could just telepathically communicate eventually. And if that sounds like it's crazy, you know, being able to have a God slate that answers all of your questions in your pocket was considered crazy 20 years back, but now it's the truth. Power itself will probably become free in this future, where we will be able to pull power from, you know, the sun and wind and fusion, and be able to power ourselves without it having to go through oil and all of the stuff that happens now. Now, imagine that. How does it change things when we can travel to any part of the world instantaneously and experience it? We can communicate with our minds, and we can be present wherever we like, whenever we like, to communicate with whoever we like instantaneously, physically-ish, where power becomes infinite and free. How does that change the way that the world is, right? Now, in the middle of that, you put artificial intelligences that can perform jobs better than humans. You put digital assets where the velocity of money goes to infinitely many multiples beyond where it is today, where, you know, we are able to exist in digital spaces which we've never had before, and have experiences that the human mind probably will not be able to fathom until we actually create them. That revolutionizes the way that humans exist. Right? Even kids today, when you ask them, like, you know, when you talk to kids today, their idea of like you're Chinese, you're Indian, all those things are kind of leaving their minds, because as far as they're concerned, they're like global children. They communicate with people from across the world. They don't even know who they're playing games with or who they're connecting with. They've kind of become these supranational children. And a lot of them, when you speak to them, you know, you ask them like, oh, do you want to become an entrepreneur? Do you want to do all this stuff? And they're like, no. Like, this is 13, 15-year-olds. They're like, why would I want to do any of that stuff? I want to do things to improve the world and create equanimity, and I don't want to just work for money. The idea of how to structure themselves is completely shifted, and that's gonna speed up in a massive way going forward. In each one of these revolutions that we looked at, the velocity of value went up. That's a huge thing to remember. That the first industrial revolution made it so that value could move faster through steam trains. You know, you could literally move valuable things back and forth. People, goods, services could move back and forth quicker. Knowledge and information, which is very valuable, could move faster. And people, and that increases the velocity of value. When the velocity of value goes up, that means more value can be added to people's lives, which means lives improve at a faster and faster rate. In the second one, cars and trucks could move things even faster, right? And the communication with phones could transfer value even faster. So more business, more life could be lived at a faster pace, and more money, value, could move back and forth. So the velocity of money and the velocity of value went up even faster. And that created an even more prosperous, better world where more people got pulled out of poverty and more people were able to prosper. Now we've had you can move with planes. You can literally show up on the other side of the world within a day. You could instantly communicate using technologies with each other. You could, you could send money back and forth within a few days and move 100 million tons of steel. So that created the world that we have now. The world we're going into, the velocity gets to almost instantaneous. So money and value will move almost instantaneously, right? At the same time, the the if the value that you're transferring, let's say you're sending money to do something in a digital space, the value being added back to somebody's life could be instantaneous as well, right? It's like, let's say I want to buy a course. I pay to buy the course, payment goes instantaneously. Then the course is delivered to me instantaneously. So the value came back to me instantaneously. And digital representations of value can transfer back and forth much faster than any other forms of value. So as the velocity of value goes up, as the velocity of money goes up, the amount of economy that exists in the world, the amount of prosperity that exists in the world also goes up. So people will be able to live a better life. Now, those innovation cycles we're looking at, the second chart that we just looked at, is a much better representation of the revolution cycles, right? Where now this next revolution is not just AI and Internet of Things. It's the Internet of Bodies, Internet of Senses, Internet of Artificial Intelligence being incorporated into every single thing that exists. It is going to completely change the way that we can even think about human existence and consciousness and all those things that we hold so dear and near to our hearts. Oh, what happened there? So we're moving into a world where everything will have a digital ID, people will have a social credit score, everything will be tagged, everything that we can make sentient and smart will become smart, and the banking system is going to move to a system where everything becomes a digital asset, and the ISO 20022 banking system makes it so that every single penny of value that moves in the banking system is tracked and auto-taxed and so on and so forth, right? Now, the next cycle we're going to look at. So, okay, let's just go over this again. In this innovation cycle and the industrial revolution cycles, crypto, blockchain, metaverse, Web3, these things are the core of the next cycle, right? Next innovation cycles, next industrial revolution cycles. So, these cycles have been cycles of society, cycles of technology, cycles of financial systems, cycles of all those things that are digital representations of things, right? Or not that are abstract representations of things. Now we get down to the cyclicality of humanity itself, the cyclicality of generations, the cyclicality of how people are. Right. So this concept is highlighted in The Fourth Turning. The book, The Fourth Turning, is the best representation that explains how there's a cyclicality to humanity, that we have different generations that come along and different peaks and troughs that society goes through that creates certain results. Right. So that's what we're going to look at next, which is very interesting. That is this one. So this is how the previous generations have played out, and each generational archetype comes with certain properties, let's say, right? So there's the hero generation that came during World War II. They're the ones who want to change the world. They believe in community. They are the harbingers of the new technology. They usually are from a world that is affluent and comes from its peak, but they're willing to go to war and fight for the things that they want to see change. After them comes the artist generation, because they're the ones who kind of went to war and they're like, hey, we don't really want to go to war. We'd rather be, due process and pluralism and fairness and all this stuff, because we don't want to see happen what just happened. And then after them comes 25-ish years later comes the next generation, which is a generation that hasn't been so close to war. And by that time, the previous generations have built a beautiful world, and by that time, they're in the up cycle of the world. They're on the way up, and the prosperity is going up, and they're handed a world that is becoming more prosperous, more fair, more everything. And then they usually create a world like in the 60s we had the peace and love generation. They're the ones who are like, yeah, make everything fair, man, everything's gonna be great. and then usually they get to enjoy their whole lifetime is lived in a time of prosperity and no war, and they think that's just how society works. And then the next generation after them gets a world that's already been kind of used up and is already on its way down. And these generations kind of living together then manifests a world that is effectively crashing, because all of that good and prosperity that was created by the GIs and the silent generations has now ended and been used up by the boomers and the Gen X generations. And then the millennials, who are the hero generation coming back again, are handed a world that's collapsing. So this is a very good representation of hard times make strong men. So hard times, World War II, created strong men, the GIs who went to war. Strong men create good times. The GIs went to war and created good times. Good times create weak men. So the GIs create GIs and silent were generations that came out of war. They were basically the strong men, effectively. One is a warrior strong, one is an artist peaceful strong, but there's strength in both sides. Those two generations are the strong men. They create good times. Those good times create weak men, which is the next generations, right? And those generations create hard times, which is now, right? And now what you're seeing is the weakest generations is my generation, like millennials and the generation that's coming after. We've been turned into like complete weaklings for now. And now we're in the hard times. So now the hard times we're all about to go through will turn my generation into strong men. Or many of us will die, because that's just how it goes. You know, the hero generation mostly just comes to die. But the point is, this is that cyclicality of humanity, and it plays out over about an 85-year cycle, right? So 1945 is when the previous kind of cycle effectively ended. And 85 years later is 2030. So right now we are in what's called the fourth turning. And the fourth turning is the most kind of tumultuous time when it comes to these cycles, right? It's called crisis. It's called oh shit and problems and what the fuck. I mean, I'm just kidding about a few of those. But the four kind of cycles that happen is there's crisis. After the crisis happens, there's a high that gets created. The high creates an awakening. And the awakening creates an unraveling. Again, read the book and it'll give you a much better idea of what all these things mean. But basically, those are the four seasons. Crisis is winter, which creates a high, which is spring, which creates an awakening, which is summer, which creates an unraveling, which is fall. Right? And right now, we are in the depths of crisis. And from now until 2030, effectively, this whole crisis state is going to play out in a very massive way. Now, crisis is also when things reset, right? That's why we're going through this great reset right now. And now think about it. We got one cycle ending in 2026. We got actually two 250-year cycles ending in 2026. We got one cycle that ended in 2008 and is resetting now. We got one that's ending in 2030. So all of these cycles are all going through and ending and pivoting around these times. And when you think about it, these new generations, my generation and the generations coming after, they think completely differently. You know, they're more interested in a sharing economy rather than an ownership economy. They're more interested in experiences rather than, just buying and holding assets and things. They're more focused on digital representations of things than physical representations of things. We're already living these new revolutions in many, many, many different ways. Now, a key thing to remember for these cycles, these generational cycles, is when crisis hits, people give up their rights, because in a crisis you're willing to give up your rights for peace, and that's what's happening right now. When the high hits, that's when you implement a new way. So basically, between now and 2030 is going to be the collapse of the old system, effectively, and 2030 to 2045 is where we effectively implement this new digital world, Web3, blockchain, metaverse world fully into the core of society itself. Then during the awakenings is when the rights are restored, right? So that's going to be like 2060-ish is when we go back into another peace and love revolution. And then during the unraveling, those rights will get abused. in the same way that, we had freedom and a lot of rights in the 90s and pretty recently, and those got abused to the point where like the people, the powers that be, the people who know how to use the system, actually abuse those rights to gain insane amounts of control and power and wealth. So that's very interesting. Now, the next cycle I want to look at is the where's the chart for this? Is basically the 82-year financial cycle, right? And in this case, it's represented as the 80-year institutional cycle. It's basically the same, but the world we are living in now is a world based on a monetary financial system called the Bretton Woods system, right? World War II happens, and the entire old financial system collapses. It's collapsed on purpose. Deutsche Mark dies. The British pound loses its global reserve currency status. Britain gets leveled. Germany gets leveled. Blah, blah, blah. Not blah, blah, blah. That was some serious shit, right? In 1945, all the bankers come together and create a new financial system called the Bretton Woods system, right? And that system was based on the US dollar being tied to gold and every single currency in the world being tied to the US dollar. And that system is what has created the entire prosperity that we've had up until now. But that cycle usually lasts, 80 to 82-ish years. And it started in 1945. 82 years later is 2025 to 2027-ish, And during this time, we have to have a financial system reset. And that's why we're saying by 2025, there's going to be a new banking system that's already live, but it's going to be implemented fully, the ISO 20022 banking system. That's why we're also seeing the dependence on the US dollar going away, right? China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, a lot of countries are pulling away from depending on that old Bretton Woods system of depending on the dollar. At the same time, we're seeing the fracturing of the global structure of society, right? So instead of, we're seeing different factions of countries fracture away and creating their own reserve currencies that they can trade within them. And then probably a neutral bridge reserve currency that I think is going to be XRP that sits in between them. So that's probably going to be the new system, or we'll have localized reserve currencies. The U.S. people will still use, the U.S. allies will still use the American reserve currency, and then there will be a neutral bridge reserve currency, and that becomes the new system. And this cycle is also resetting between 2025 to 2027. Now, that one has a major effect, because that effectively means that the control of the global monetary system goes from the U.S., which is a country, to supranational entities and potentially corporations, right? That's where the transition to this new world order of the one world government that has these new systems completes in a massive way. Because as soon as you have the financial system reset, whoever controls that new financial system becomes the owner of the world. And it's not a coincidence that we're being stopped from being able to interact with this new financial system called crypto, because if we could, then we become part owners of this new financial system. In that new financial system, money won't work the way that it works today. This idea of financial sovereignty goes away completely, right? Up until now, the idea was I go earn money, I put it in a bank account that I own, and it's my money and I can do whatever I want with it. First of all, that's not even true today. Like, your bank doesn't let you do whatever you want with it. It's their money, it's not your money, you sign paperwork. But that's beyond the point. At least there's some semblance of financial sovereignty that exists. In this new system, money will not belong to the person who owns it. Money will be a privilege that is granted to a person who operates within society under the populist rules created by the owners of that society. And that's called central bank digital currency, CBDCs, programmable money that is only given to you if you have the right social credit score, if you have the right digital ID, if you have everything in order, and if you are given the blessings of the powers that be to operate within the system, then you're allowed to use money. Right? That's why the CBDCs are the new system. And on the flip side of that, crypto is the new financial system that is supranational, is jurisdictionless, but it still depends on those central bank digital currencies for you to be able to buy milk with it, right? So this new financial system will not be controlled and not be controlled by one country, and it'll be centrally controlled by supranational entities with three-letter names and NGOs and stuff. But at the same time, it will also be controlled down to the people themselves. At the same time, the crypto side of it will be allowed to be more decentralized and more free within the crypto space, let's say, you know. So it's kind of like a two-way financial system. So then when you're looking at the same chart, the institutional cycles chart, not only did we create a new financial system in 1945, we created new institutions, right? The world organized into new institutions. So we created the UN, the United Nations. We created the Bretton Woods system. We gave control of the world's money supply to the Federal Reserve, the World Bank, IMF, World Economic Forum. All of these are the new institutions. So the old institutions were these, governments running and controlling things in a very, very serious manner. And then we had, the UN sitting above governments. And then we created things like Financial Action Task Force and all these things. Sorry, that came later. There's music playing, so it's like distracting the shit out of me right now. We created new institutions at that time in 1945, which ran the world until now. Now we're seeing the new set of institutions that are being implemented now that are taking over the world. That's your IMF, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization. All of those are the new institutions that are going to be running the world going forward for the next 80 years. At the same time, within crypto and blockchain and metaverse and stuff, we're creating decentralized autonomous organizations, which are effectively institutions run by nobody, by code. Those are going to be a new structure of institutions. We are creating effectively entities that could be controlled by AI potentially going forward, which are a new way of structuring institutions. So effectively, the institutional cycle is resetting by 2025 as well. 2025, 2027, latest by 2030. So the financial institutions are resetting, the global control institutions are resetting, and blockchain, Web3, and metaverse and all these things are at the heart of that shift that's happening. The next cycle we're going to look at is the socioeconomic cycle, right? So there's a 50-year socioeconomic cycle that effectively reset from 1980 until now. And it goes from 1980 to 2030. You see, all of these are resetting at the same time. And society structured itself around they call it the Reagan cycle, right? So 1971, US breaks the tie of the US dollar from gold. And the entire world's money was basically just tied to the US dollar, which is backed by the US government, and it's based on nothing, right? And that completely changed the way that money worked, which completely changed the way the world worked and sent it off into this prosperity cycle, which was really good. But now we've seen it peaking for the last little while, right? You see from then 1971 that happens, from 1980 until 1980 we see the collapse, and then from 1980 until the 2000s, 2008, we see it actually prosperity peak in a massive way, and then 2008 until 2030 we see this crash and collapse, and from 2030 the next socioeconomic cycle starts. And the next socioeconomic cycle is going to be very much based on society living in a digital representation, right? The society living in this non-local way where people from across the world interact in digital and non-digital spaces, digital and physical spaces seamlessly, interact in companies and organizations which could potentially exist outside of jurisdictional states, which are based on monies which are jurisdictionless. So society and economies restructure themselves in a completely new way. And 2030 onwards is going to be the real growth cycle of that whole process. Between now and 2030, we see the collapse of this old system and the beginning of the building of that new system. That's 2030, okay? Now, the last cycle that I want to look at in this analysis is the long-term debt cycle. So this one, Ray Dalio points out in a pretty significant way. But the long-term debt cycle is a pretty simple representation of when you can take on more and more debt, prosperity increases. And when debt gets harder and harder to take on, then prosperity decreases, right? So last time this reset back in, 1930s, right? 1933, we had the reset of the cycle, and then they printed a bunch of money to try to save the world. And then by 1945, they printed so much money that the entire world blew up, and the only thing they could do is go into World War II. And then that's when the New World Order comes along, right? That's when this whole Bretton Woods, U.S. running the world, that's the New World Order back then. That was the chic world order back then, comes along and gets activated. From that moment onwards, the amount of money printing slows down and stops, but the interest rates start to go up, right? And that creates this moment of stability, prosperity in the world. And then as interest rates start to go down, debt starts to go up, which shoots the prosperity up. And that's from 1980 until now, right? Debt starts to go to the roof, and that's unsustainable. That means that at some point it's going to end. And 80 years later, after 1933, we have basically a collapse of the world's banking system. And from there, we start printing money to infinity again to try to save the world, because interest rates are so low. And now what's going to happen is it's going to get to a point where the printing of the money is going to get too much and we can't save the world. Then we go into World War III at some point, and then interest rates start to go up, which is what's been happening now. And that whole process effectively allows us to pay off the debts that were taken on during this pump by printing a bunch of money and paying off the debts, right? What happens during the long-term debt cycle is the people who are sitting in cash lose their wealth, and the people who are sitting in assets gain wealth. That's the simplest way of looking at it. Now, usually when the reset happens, about 15 years later is when the cycle resets fully, right? Like 1933, or 1930, the technical collapse happens, 1929, and then about 15 years later, in 1945, is when the resolution happens and the new world order is fully implemented, and everybody goes back to like full-on peace times. We now had the new debt cycle, or the new cycle, basically beginning in 2008, right? So 15 years later puts us at about 2023. Same thing, around this time is when we see the blow up of this whole old system, and we go into some kind of a world war, and on the other side is a new financial system that comes out of that whole process. So again, you're seeing a pattern repeating here, right? Good times followed by abuse of good times. Abuse leads to the messing up of good times. That leads to war. That leads to us figuring out a new system, a new way of doing it. And when it comes to this, long-term debt cycle, that's why things like crypto, things like Bitcoin cannot be created out of thin air. They can't be printed. That's why having a new system based on things that cannot be printed is very attractive to people. And that's why everybody's adopting this new system, this new way of doing it, and this new way of organizing ourselves. So these aren't even all the cycles. There's actually so many other things that on the next, one of the next times, we're actually going to go through a lot of the data that's available in the Ray Dalio's book, Changing World Order. That's going to really highlight a lot of the points here. But my point in presenting this cyclical history is, if you know that these are the cycles, and if we know that the winter of all of these cycles that we just discussed is happening now, what do you do during winter? Right? Normally, what do you do during winter? You build shelter, you get food, you get warm clothes, you hunker down, you ride it out, you get some firewood or electricity and heat yourself. You come together in communities, burn a fire, sit around, share, and make sure the winter doesn't kill you, right? And on the other side is a beautiful spring. So you prepare for the spring, You preserve your seeds. You make sure your seeds don't get destroyed. You start to do a lot of the things necessary for you to get ready for the spring on the other side. And you know there's a spring coming. So whatever, no matter how cold winter gets, you hold faith and stay strong because you know on the other side is a beautiful, beautiful spring, right? That's what we've been doing the whole time here. And if anything, between now and 2030, we know that there's going to be, many more of these collapses, and we're going to go into the depths of deeper states of winter. Okay, that's why I'm having a farm. That's why we're building all of these these digital assets for us to be able to protect our wealth from all these collapses and put it somewhere where, as the currencies are printed into to infinity and inflated, the assets actually benefit. That's why we're becoming asset holders, because remember, asset holders win and currency holders lose. That's why we're building communities of people coming together who are on the same vibe, they're in harmonic resonance about the way that we want the world to be. And that's why we're already building the world that is going to exist in the spring. This isn't a short-term thing. Between now and 2026 is chaos. Between 2026 to 2030 is still more chaos, but just the settling down of chaos. 2030 onwards is the spring. That's when we start the spring process. So 7 years. 7 years isn't a very long time when you look at it. The world has been in this chaotic state for a very long period of time. The next 7 years will determine how we get to spring. And our goal is just to get our freaking tiny little seeds, which is like, you probably, you're watching this, you might have this many seeds. You might have this many seeds. They might look like coins. They might look like houses. They might look like whatever. However many seeds we have, our goal is to just make sure we protect them through winter. Make sure we're, keeping ourselves warm and happy and alive and in good spirits and meditating during winter. And we're just trying to get our seeds to the other side so that when spring comes, we can plant them, or if anything, what I've been doing right now is we've been building the ability for us to be able to plant things down the road, or, in this analogy, we're already planting things. I mean, we're literally planting things we're doing things with farmers, but hopefully this makes sense. So that is why when I look at all of these cycles, it becomes very obvious where history is going to go. Right? The more you study this stuff, the more you can just look forward and go, well, what do I think is going to happen? Do I think governments are going to take over more? Yes. Looks like it. Do I think we're going to go into war? Yeah. Pretty sure. Pretty sure. There's a 100% success rate on that one. Do I think the dollar is going to collapse? Yeah, but it's going to take a while. It's going to take until 2045, looks like, latest, fully. Do I think interest rates are going to go up? Yeah. Seems like it. For the next 40-ish years, seems like these traditional interest rates are going to go up at some point. They don't just go up straight. They go like this, right? But yeah, looks like it. Is society going to completely restructure and everything we know from today will not make sense 10 years down the road? Oh, absolutely. Right? Look 20 years back and look at the world we're living today with this and AIs and this, and I'm talking to you from across the world and I'm reaching out to you and and you're commenting back. Yeah. Is the world not going to make sense to you at all within 7 years? Yeah. Are we going to have sentient takeover of digital spaces and metaverse and all this? Yeah, it is. What do we do about it? Well, let's think about that. Okay. If the world is transitioning towards decentralized states, let's become more decentralized. If food production is becoming decentralized, let's start producing our own food. If money is transitioning to this new super controlled method, well, let's get it out of their hands and transition it into this more free state, which is crypto, in some capacity. And then when we need to pull it back out into dollars, let's make sure we're doing that correctly by setting up on ramps and off ramps. When you're looking at countries, the U.S. is in a collapsing state. China is teetering and is going to collapse sometime soon, and the population is going to collapse, and its prosperity cycle is not doing too well. Asia, Africa, South America, Middle East, these places are on their way up. Not Middle East as much, but Asia, Africa, India, South America, the countries that have been poor are now going to go through their prosperity cycle, right? Because they're just coming out of the bottom of their bullshit shitty cycle. Whereas UK, Europe, Australia, Canada, US, Japan, all of these countries have peaked in their prosperity, so they're on their way down. So what should I do? Well, I should probably just move to these other places. Like, I came to Southeast Asia for a reason. I know where the growth is going to be for the next 40 years. Like, and anybody who looks for 40 seconds can tell that the Southeast Asia is going to be the best growth place to be. Indonesia is one of the wealthiest countries when it comes to assets, but the actual population is poor, yet it's young. So demographically speaking, this is a young population, massive population with a lot of actual wealth, where there's a lot of development that needs to happen. So do I think I'm going to do great work being here, or am I going to do great in America, where every single person has a gun and is ready to murder me for no reason whatsoever, because of my skin color or because they think I'm a terrorist or something, right? So you can make decisions from your life by simply understanding what all of this stuff is. And then when you have the zoomed out view and you go, oh, revolutionary cycle, these technologies are the revolution, check. The decentralization cycle, these technologies are the answer, check. The populism cycle, these technologies are it, check. And you keep doing that multiple times. Eventually you get to a point where you're like, Jesus, these are the answer to everything. So the things I've been fearing, AI, metaverse, crypto, all these things, and the things I'm fearing are the answer and are the future, which clearly from history seems like it's the reason why they're existing now. And the next 250 years will run on these technologies. Now do I have more trust in them than this whole old collapsing system, which I can see in every single graph and chart that is collapsing? Which one do I trust more, right? Hopefully that wakes you up to this shift that's going on. And if it doesn't make a difference. It's going to happen no matter what. So there's a lot of people who think about, oh, I want to stop this. I want to stop metaverse. I want to stop AI. I want to stop digital ID. I want to stop government control. I want to stop. No, that's not how it works. Like history has momentum to it. These things take 20, 30, 50, 80, 100, 200, 250 years to gain momentum. And it's like you're on the ocean and you're seeing a giant tsunami coming and you're like, I want to stop the tsunami. No, you can't unless you stop the earthquake, which happened a long time ago, right? These are the results of human choices that are all, from our grandparents' generations. So you don't stop a tsunami. You ride a tsunami, right? You either get onto high ground and protect yourself in some way, or you ride out into the ocean. One of the things people don't realize is one of the best ways to be safe from a tsunami is to ride out into the ocean. Go into the tsunami itself, right? Run towards the things that you're fearing. Learn about them, participate, start to understand and build a mental picture of what's going on in the world and where you're sitting in the middle of that, and then make your decisions from the very big picture down to you with these different understandings. That has been my point. That's why I love doing this talk. I will do this probably every 6 months, probably every 6 months, just to update it with all the new ongoings that are happening. And that's why we're able to predict things. I'm not saying I'm some Nostradamus. I'm wrong a lot of times, but most of my predictions are coming from this lens of looking at the world. And it's just like history doesn't repeat, but it has really good, it raps really good. History had some solid flow. It's like, it's got that like cadence, like Eminem. It just drops a beat hard, So, we had another technical difficulty. Okay, well, that's been Zet has been out of time today. Hopefully this added a lot of value. If you're watching this far, again, can you subscribe? Like somewhere around here, right there. Subscribe. That way we can send you a bunch of funny shit that we're coming up with, or not, or just come back and watch us. Love you the same as always, and thank you for your time, and we'll see you guys next time.